Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I am Catherine, and welcome to day 10 of our spring break sprint, where I am diving into old F1 history and F1 lore to help educate other Formula One fans that have come in during the Drive to Survive era, and to educate myself on old stuff that's happened before I showed up as a fan in 2021. If you have missed the beginning of the series, if you're just coming in now, the entire series is linked above. And in yesterday's episode, I covered the drivers who have had the most wins in their career without actually winning a driver's championship. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss a video in this series and all season long, so I can continue to inflict my motorsport opinions upon the greater population. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. Now, today we are flashing back to the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, and specifically the race that got Flavio Briatore a ban for life that was ultimately overturned because, he's still here at Alpine. But this is the race that had happened. I watched the race the other day on F1 TV. I discovered that I actually can get back into my F1 TV account, what with the whole Apple TV thing that's happening. I queued up the race, and all I was hearing was like crowd noises and engine sounds, and I was like, it's going to be very difficult for me to watch this race and react to it if I'm not listening to like the actual commentary. But apparently that was just a setting, so once I fixed that, I was actually able to hear words, or that was going to be a really long couple of hours. So first of all, if you don't already know who Flavio Briatore is, he's the current basically de facto team boss at Alpine. He's responsible for picking and choosing their drivers and which drivers he wants to traumatize for the beginnings of their careers, or the current time in Pierre Gasly's career that it is. He has been around Formula One for a long time, and he is a very, let's call it a polarizing figure. He has been convicted of fraud multiple times in business interests in the 80s before he even got to Formula One, actually spent a few years living in the Virgin Isles in exile before Europe eventually let him come back. And once he got to Formula One, he had been accused of cheating multiple times throughout the 90s and 2000s, including something called Spygate. If you've heard of Spygate, this is that guy, but we're not going to talk about Spygate today. But we are going to talk about Crashgate, which happened literally a year later. So clearly somebody needs to stop this man. But Flavio Briatore is also responsible for bringing Michael Schumacher to Benetton, but also responsible for having some really sketchy contract practices. So has he done some good things for Formula One? Yes. Has he also done some pretty terrible things for Formula One, like Crashgate? Also, yes. Now, let's start by talking about the Singapore Grand Prix. The 2008 Singapore Grand Prix was the first Grand Prix race since a Formula Libre event in the early 1970s, and it was a big deal to turn Singapore into not just a place that people have their airport layovers on their way to the rest of Asia, but to make it an actual tourist destination, which clearly has worked. The Singapore Grand Prix is still on the grid. Singapore is one of the biggest tourist destinations in the world. So success for them on that. 2008, going into the race, was the 15th of 18 races. The World Championship had not been decided yet and was currently 1 point between Lewis Hamilton and Felipe Massa. There were a few other drivers that were still in the running at the time for the championship, but those were kind of like the two front runners. Lewis Hamilton was driving for McLaren at the time, and Felipe Massa was with Ferrari. Renault, Flavio Briatore's team, where he was a team principal at the time, was P5 in the championship with 41 points. They hadn't had the best season, but the second half of the season was better for Renault than the first half. We've seen that before many a times. And the drivers for Renault that year, number one was Fernando Alonso. This was his 7th season in Formula One and 2 seasons post his second world championship with Renault. And then Nelson Piquet Jr. was the rookie who was driving alongside him. Now, there were there's two major storylines coming out of this race. First is the Crashgate crash, which was when Nelson Piquet Jr. intentionally crashed his car to give Fernando better track position, but also the fight between Lewis Hamilton and Felipe Massa. Now, for the Crashgate portion of the shenaniganery here is Fernando had a really bad qualifying due to a fuel line issue, because this was, in case you don't remember or don't know, this was an era of Formula One where they actually refueled the cars during the race. It was part of the strategy. So you could do things like you could underfuel your car and go on softs, so you have a light, fast car and attempt to get past other cars in front of you that way. Or you could fuel yourself heavy, put your car on hards, and just hope that everyone crashes around you and get track position and overtake. So there are a lot of different strategies you can use for fueling, which we don't use anymore because too many drivers kept catching fire by accident, and also other incidents, including the Massa incident that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So Fernando had a fueling issue, which dropped him down. He qualified P14, 15. He didn't qualify well. He should have been way closer to the front. And so he started on softs, and he ended up pitting and refueling on lap 12. 3 laps later, Nelson Piquet Jr. crashes on lap 15. Now, he says in the post-crash interview that they showed on the broadcast that he used a strategy where Fernando went light, he went heavy. So he was on heavy fuel and having difficulty turning the car, which is how he ended up crashing. Not only did he end up crashing, but he ended up crashing on a portion of the track where it was not easy to recover the car, meaning that they had to have a safety car. Interesting, right? So during that safety car, we're moving to the Massa-Hamilton fight. Felipe Massa goes into the pits under the safety car because you get a faster pit stop. But unfortunately, he left his pit box prematurely due to Stefano Domenicali, who was the team boss at Ferrari at the time, insisted it was human error, but they were using a new electronic system to cue the drivers of when they were supposed to go. And clearly it didn't work very well because the fuel line ended up still attached to Massa's car. And basically he was lucky enough that he stopped before the line that the mechanics cannot cross in the pit lane. So you have all of these Ferrari mechanics sprinting down the pit, and you have, for example, because this was called out on the broadcast, the McLaren mechanics that are mocking the Ferrari mechanics as they sprint down to try to save Felipe Massa's race, which was absolutely totally ruined. He went from 1st to 18th, and the race was totally gone for him. Fernando, on the other hand, he's got much better track position. He is much further to the front. Everybody ahead of him is still going to have to pit, which is the likes of Lewis Hamilton. I think Kimi Räikkönen was up there for a time. Nico Rosberg was driving really well at the time. So that was good for Fernando. And I loved, there were just a number of really interesting quotes from the people doing commentary, one of which was Martin Brundle, who we still have on commentary now, who at one point said, "This is a rather bizarre strategy." The person who was interviewing Nelson Piquet Jr. in the media pen said, "Ironically, your teammate's strategy could work very well in this situation." Somebody also said it wasn't their fault Nelson Piquet hit the wall. Spoiler alert. It didn't seem like it worked out well for him on that strategy. And Massa's not going to score unless we have another bizarre situation, which I just kind of giggled at because the bizarre situation was manufactured. And then somebody else said his accident, meaning Nelson Piquet's, may well allow his teammate to win the race. Spoiler alert, that's what happened. So not only did Fernando Alonso win, Flavio Briatore goes, he was a team principal at the time, he has the audacity to go up and accept the constructor's trophy. And from the Hamilton Massa side of things, Lewis finished P3. He ended up stretching his lead to 7 points ahead of Massa. And Massa is basically currently suing Formula One in the result of the 2008 World Championship because of what happened in Singapore, which, yeah, Crashgate was bad and you're not supposed to make one driver crash a car so that the other driver can win the race. But also it was Ferrari's fault that Massa drove off with his fuel line still attached. So there's like a little bit of back and forth of like, where's the justification here other than the fact that Nelson Piquet Jr.'s crash is what made Massa pit in the first place. So it's tied in. It's obviously still being litigated as of April 2026. We will see. I think Massa did get a judgment in his favor about something related to this as it continues to go on, but nothing significant has happened yet. And I still don't think that they're actually going to invalidate Lewis's championship, because I also think that would open a bunch of doors for precedents for the other championships, including, say, Max Verstappen's win in 2021. So we'll see. But the aftermath of the Crashgate crash was nothing. Was absolutely nothing. They moved on. Lewis Hamilton won the world championship by 1 point a couple of races later, and there was nothing. Then we moved to the 2009 season. Nelson Piquet Jr. had a decent season in 2008. He finished P12 in the championship, had a P2 in Germany, and was re-signed for another year with Renault. But 2009 was not a good year for Nelson Piquet Jr. He had 2 retirements. He had no finishes in the points, and his best finish was P10, but at the time he only got points down to P8. After he finished P12 in Hungary, he was dropped from the team. And then in August, word starts getting around to some of the Brazilian media, Nelson Piquet Jr. is Brazilian, that the crash in Singapore the year before might have been deliberate. And Nelson Piquet Jr. basically, in exchange for immunity, tells the FIA that he was asked to crash on purpose. Allegedly, this is all alleged, but he was allegedly asked to do so by Flavio Briatore and their lead engineer, Pat Simmons. And Renault and Briatore threatened to take legal action, but then September rolled around and the team announced that they would not contest the charges, which means they totally did it, allegedly totally did it. Renault itself was handed a disqualification from Formula One, while Flavio Briatore was banned for the foreseeable future, while Simmons received a 5-year ban. Those bans were ultimately overturned by a French court, but they still agreed not to work in FIA sanctioned events or in Formula One for a while. Flavio Briatore made his return to the Renault Alpine Cinematic Universe in 2022 as an ambassador and is now basically the guy in charge, while Simmons actually returned way earlier in 2011 with Virgin Racing, back when Virgin had a car on the grid for all of 5 minutes. He moved to Williams for a little while, then actually became the chief technical officer for all of Formula One before in May of 2024 moving to Cadillac, where he currently serves as an executive engineering consultant. The moral of the story here is hell hath no fury of a Nelson Piquet Jr. scorned, because had he not been fired mid-season, he probably wouldn't have said anything and probably wouldn't have leaked it to the Brazilian media that there was something sketchy about him crashing the car in Singapore that allowed Fernando Alonso to win the race. So, oops. So he got one over on Flavio, and I'm sure their relationship right now is great. But watching the race and watching classic, it was 2008, watching older F1 races is really fun, really entertaining. Obviously, I did the Catherine Watch Every Race of the 2016 season episode, which is linked either above or in the show notes or both. And obviously, I watched the 2005 US Grand Prix because that race was crazy. But it's really fun to relive these old races. Shout out to F1 TV for having them available going back many, many years. Now, obviously, when it comes to cheating in Formula One, like, everybody does it. It's just a matter of who's the best at not getting caught. And clearly Flavio is allegedly a blatant cheater who is just very bad at hiding his cheating. So interesting things here. And if Alpine suddenly gets very good very fast, we kind of are going to know why. So we'll see. I don't think that's going to go quite like that, but if they suddenly get like a really good driver and they suddenly get really good results, you might want to look at them a little closely. But anyway, we'll see. Coming up next, we are going to get to know Formula One's first ever world champion, Giuseppe Farina. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a video in this series or all season long. Thanks for going off track with me, and I will see you in the next one.